covering PII, privacy, all things personalization and privacy in the digital age. So I'd like to bring up on stage to cover this very topical industry conversation, Chris Brinkworth from Civic Data, David Fodel from AWS, and Raj Shah from MoEngage. Please come up on stage. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Can you introduce yourselves just in the same format, a little bit of background, who you are, a little bit of information, something that we don't know about you. Potentially we do know about you through a data breach that over the last couple of years. But please, introduce yourselves. Raj, would you like to go first?
So it's Raj. I represent MoEngage. We are a global programmable communication provider, fully owned by Ericsson, so part of one of the oldest telco in the world, probably 146-year-old company now. And where we work, and especially for this panel, we work with BFSI industry to help them to reduce phishing attacks, to prevent them for the fraud. Because it's something we all been part of that. We all get those SMSs and voice calls and everything. So that we work, and I definitely agree with this is the best panel, definitely. And a fun fact about me, look, if any fan over here of cricket, cool. So definitely Indian fan as well. So I do play drums at STG when India plays, so to support Indian Army, Indian Bharat Army, I would say.
That's great. That's great. Chris.
I'm Chris. I'm a rapper. No, joking. So I started a business about 2.5 years ago called Civic Data, and it's a third business really that I've been involved with, where we're focused around, ironically, how data is collected from users. So my original background, there's a bit of a reason for this kind of story, is I was part of the first ever ASX listed media buying digital agency listed on the ASX. And then after doing that for 7 years, I went across to the US and I opened up the US office for the first ever tag management system that was called Tagman. And after my time there, having met all these incredibly smart people who started businesses that they sold to Yahoo, or they sold to Google, they sold to Salesforce, businesses you would know, I kind of put some time in when I came back after Tagman got acquired by Insighton. And 3 years ago, I called all those people up and I said, where are you focused? What are you doing at the moment? Predominantly, those people who'd done those previous MarTech, AdTech businesses were focused on this very problem that we're discussing today, which is around the impact of privacy on MarTech media and measurement. And how can you, at a technical level, cope with what the impact is to your actual stack, but also what is the impact from a regulatory consent governance perspective as well. So, fun fact about me, I think I met Ivan Milat, is my fun fact for everyone. Hope that woke everyone up. Perfect.
Is this on? I'm David from Amazon. It's a bit of an Amazon show today, sorry. A company that we like to fail a lot. Thank you, Robin. I fail all the time. I look after strategy for our financial services business here in Australia and New Zealand. I've been there for the last 6.5 years, and prior to that spent about 20 years in banking. Fun fact from me, I love rolling this out for my kids who are now young adults because it makes them cringe. I'm into esports. I was once ranked in the top 50 in the world in one of the esports that I participate in, and when people hear that, they go, oh wow, that's amazing. The esport that I was ranked in the top 50 in the world is ocean racing. Not very sexy, but still lots of participants, very slow sport.
Very interesting, thank you. Fantastic, let's dive into the conversation, personalization and privacy in the digital age. For those who have not been keeping up over the last couple of years, I'd say that outside of the deprecation of the cookie, privacy and the digital privacy reform has probably been the hearts and minds and talking points for every marketer, technology decision maker, C-suite, in the industry. So, Chris, your extensive experience in the space and co-chair of the IAB Data Council, you've got a lot of experience around this conversation regulatory landscape quite well. Can you provide a brief summary of the privacy landscape, including some of those key events that have led us to the points of, I guess, digital privacy reform, and as well just the latest updates, because there was some new findings in the recent submission, and some have been rejected, some are agreed in principle. I think about 30% from the Attorney General has been kind of agreed to. So yeah, if you can maybe set the backdrop for the conversation here.
We're all screwed. So no, look, I think if we were to look at it, I know for a fact I put Australians into about $1 billion worth of credit card debt because of the things that we did in the very early 2000s, as an example, where we suddenly realized how easy it was to drop a cookie on someone, track them, and then I think I think we did one of the first ever remarketing campaigns globally as well, when we realized you could go cross-domain and start to follow someone around the internet. And I specifically remember being on a panel, well, sorry, no, I wasn't on a panel there, it was 2004, I was in the crowd in Seattle. And you had Terry Semel, who was the CEO of Yahoo at the time, on stage, Yusuf Mendes, who was the Microsoft advertising president at the time, Greg Stewart, who was the chairman of the IAB at the time, and the editor for Slate magazine. And you've got to remember, back in 2004, Microsoft and Yahoo were the dominant players when it came to digital advertising and the spend. And I actually asked a question based on a campaign we'd been running, where we'd been collecting and cookieing anyone that looked at PlayStation-related gaming websites, or anyone that looked at any site related to that kind of not online gaming, but just gaming in general. And then we used DoubleClick Boomerang, was the product back then, and we basically did a deal with all of the major parties, so Microsoft, 9MSN, Yahoo Australia, it was Yahoo 7 back then, and we did a deal where anyone that had a broadband connection that had previously been placed in a segment with a cookie that said, I'm a gamer, we then did this big eye blaster overlay that went all over their screen saying, now you can network game. And my question to these three, because the question was originally, hey, how can we all work together to get people to spend more money online? And my question was, how can I show that great big advert on Yahoo Autos for a Subaru or whatever it is, a Mazda, but then I don't want to be annoying the next time. When they're on Microsoft, I just want to show them a kind of small follow-on banner that's not as in your face. And just coming back to your point about how do we get to here, where we are here, the guy then from Slate, because no one had been doing this stuff yet, but we'd been doing, says, I don't know where you're from, but we got a thing here called the Justice Department. But then it became this massive multi-billion-dollar industry, and I think we pushed it too far. And I think social media companies, tech giants pushed it too far. And people, and we've all had enough of it a little bit, and I'm kind of like the guy who used to sell cigarettes, and now I'm doing smoking cessation courses in a way. But that's why we're where we're at. And the amount of information we collected, what we were doing with it, the way that we're using it to pretty much manipulate people through dark patterns in some ways, that has led to all sorts of challenges around too much information on file, which we don't need anymore, so a cyber breach will screw us. The government don't like cyber breaches, because then that also means more cyber breaches will happen. And that's happened globally, not just here. And I think that's kind of the reason we're there, is because we got very good at doing this, but now it's time to put a lid on it and kind of just calm it back a bit, because it's getting too easy to do it.
So would you say, just at that point, Chris, it was pretty much the ad tech world that kind of drove it, I guess, to the surface the quickest? It was third-party data aggregators for mainly digital advertising. For those that don't know, the IAB is the Internet Advertising Bureau, which is what Chris is referring to. But it would have been started from collection of third-party data, on-selling it to build audiences, and now that's kind of proliferated into consumer opt-in, sending data sovereignty, so it's kind of encompassed a much bigger discussion point, right?
I think no one would argue that if you look at the technologies that Google has bought over the years, over the past 10 years specifically, and where they've been in the news recently, it has been predominantly around the data being collected by the products that they own, being used on the products that they own, that you spend money with them, and they make a decision on the price that you spend and so on. So I think, yes, that is the case. But it's then permeated out through the ecosystem, where if you look at Apple, despite, and everyone's probably seen the Apple adverts where they say, Apple is privacy, we're really great, we're all amazing on securing your privacy, but everyone's waiting for Apple themselves to sell that data back to us, just in different ways. So where all of our stacks have been impacted by cookie deprecation, the ITP2 point, whatever it is now, IDFA removal, that is having a major impact on their competitors, including Google as well. So I think then if you look, however, how that data can be used in other ways, it's beyond just ad tech now. So we put forward a submission several times for the review of the Privacy Act. It's been going on for 3 years now, and we were lucky enough to be referenced quite a few times in our kind of thoughts around individuation, re-identification, anonymization of data, and what can be used. And I was very clear in there about the future problems. And if you look at X, is it X? Yeah, X, Twitter. You've got a guy there who owns a major social media platform, but he's also got a car company with 9 sensors on it that go around the world collecting all this information. And he's also got a satellite company up above. And that's a very, very, very big data collecting machine that he's owning there. So electric cars are data harvesting machines, if you look at it. It's like the e-scooters someone mentioned earlier on. It's fascinating. Yeah. So was ad tech? Much more now.
Yeah. David, given your background in financial services, you're familiar with the delicate balance between personalisation and privacy. What are some steps financial services or fintech leaders take to educate consumers about how their data is collected and used so that consumers have more trust in that brand?
I actually think that financial services as an industry is pretty well evolved when it comes to collection and use of data. When you boil financial services down to its basis element, it's an industry of managing risk. And the practice of managing risk is all about collecting and analysing data and then employing it into making decisions. So it's an industry that's been doing this for a long time. It works within a regulatory construct that means that when you get it wrong, you pay a high price. So generally, and I am generalising, organisations who work within this industry collect and use, I'll put store aside because I think that's a different proposition, but certainly collect and use data fairly responsibly. What I would say though, and it was great to hear Casey talk about CDR. So the consumer data right is over time going to fundamentally change the paradigm when it comes to the sharing, collection and use of data. We've got a long, long way to go to get to maturity, but it will change the game. It's interesting to see the difference between new entrants to market who are coming in off the back of open data, open banking, open finance, the way that they explicitly share with their users of their platforms or their products or their services the way in which data is being collected and used, versus incumbents in the market who've been doing this for a long time who tend to embed those terms and conditions in very small font in very detailed documents. But there is still a lot of opaqueness between explicit and implied consents when it comes to the use of information. Even when I looked at what I think is best practice, and what I would put up there as an example off the back of CDR is Frollo, who are becoming one of the hubs with respect to open banking. Even in their terms that they have very easy to find, there is vagueness with respect to the use of data when it comes to implied and explicit consent. So there is still some vagary around it, which I think that the changes in the Privacy Act that are coming through need to start to weed out.
Yeah, that's something that we've seen. MoEngage, we work with quite a lot of banks and highly regulated industry, and yeah, financial services are probably leading the way because they have to, because of the nature. Raj, when we talk about privacy and data protection, one thing that we've seen often is fraud and fraudulent activity, especially in the banking sector again. So how do you handle, or how does Vonage handle the reduction of such activities?
Sure. So look, it's in general, not just BFSI. Fraud, which is happening, and identity theft, and anything can be built on that to impersonate someone and getting access. Especially when we speak to BFSI, like banking customers, there are two ways. Our approach is always in two segments. The first one is fraudster pretending to be bank customer and scam the bank. And the second category is fraudster pretend to be the bank and scam the consumer. So in both the scenario, we work with the banks. For example, thanks to our parent company, Ericsson, like in Australia, the whole 5G network is built by Ericsson. So now we have access to location-based data. Yeah, and we work with telcos, we work with the bank, and we provide that IP to the bank that Raj normally signs in, lives in Sydney, and signs in from this particular computer. This is the IP address. And now all of a sudden, someone tried to access Raj's account from Thailand. They might have my details, but with the AML, actually a lot of people talk about AIML. So, but now the bank on the back end can talk about, all right, hang on. So this is 99% of the time right when he signs in from the browser. This is the IP. This is a different IP coming from a different country. Let's ask him probably multi-factor authentication. Instead of just asking for the OTP, let's ask him multi-factor. And that's how the bank can, be a little bit smarter about to reduce the fraud. On top of that, we are a global telco. So we work with probably 1,600 networks globally, telcos globally. We do about 1.2 billion messages, SMS messages through our platform every single day. So we collect a lot of data. We're working with Optus and Telstra in Australia and putting all the fraud and spam filtering into at the network level. So now we go through and scan that the SID, which is a sender ID, when you receive the text from CBA, it says CBA. So we know that this SID, it's fraud, because that's not coming from the sender, which is CBA, who registered for that. So, and the message is content as well. So, Telstra has started now filtering all the web links and everything comes in SMS. So all the spam and phishing attacks, that's how it starts. So we are working with telco. The good thing is when you, like with our access, most of the time, fraudulent SMS and everything hits the Australian customer. It's coming from overseas. So, different telcos, not controlled by Optus and Telstra. And that's where the expertise, like from it comes into play, because we got access to all those data points as well.
Great. Chris, been recent studies, consumers find product recommendations, we use the word creepy, it's been used a couple of times today. With iOS and Google phasing out third-party track cookies, what are the viable options for particularly the vertical of retail and e-commerce where product recommendations are, so prevalent and so important to driving personalization and users down the funnel? What are some of those alternatives that brands can adopt?
Hands up here if you know the name of your head legal and privacy counsel. Right. There's something you can adopt. What we're seeing, and just where we get traction with our clients is predominantly because we're very good at explaining to lawyers the problems that marketers and MarTech leaders are facing, and explaining to MarTech and marketing leaders what the lawyers are trying to do. And we're starting to see, especially, FinServe's an interesting area because you've got APRA there already from a regulatory perspective, so that's quite well tied down. But since the review of the Privacy Act happened, and 3 weeks ago, I don't know if anyone's aware, the report came out from the Attorney General about what the 116 changes are.
Can you go through all 116?
Sure. So I think where we're getting the traction is we do these 90-minute sessions where we will give our interpretation of the Privacy Act, where we invite the leadership team in, head of legal, head of data, head of MarTech, head of marketing, and we just go through what we think it means. And that then opens up this whole kind of cathartic release of stress in the room that you're probably all feeling, because you've got a whole bunch of investments and projects that you've put in play that will probably be at risk. And on the FinServ side, I know there was one particular very large bank who told me we had a dotted line which we could go up to before in regards to using customer data. And we've now been told by legal that we can no longer go to that dotted line because of the privacy reform, and it's been moved way back. And if you consider the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars people are putting into marketing transformation projects, technology, if you don't let your head legal team know what is important to you and what you're doing, it may well just be cut out from under your legs. So I'm going to be very honest about that piece. I think that's the most important thing, is find out internally who your legal team are and let them know what's important to you, and get their understanding of what they know about the law, of the changes. But I think you've got, even the sponsors, so you've got, I was looking at the sponsors, you've got mParticle, who are kindly sponsoring. They've got a built-in consent management piece to what they do. So that's one area. If you're not already understanding what informed consent is, and I think that's a real key point here, is informed consent. And there's a great analogy I like to use of this meme. I've still not done it as a post on my LinkedIn, but there's a guy who's sucking up leaves in Leaf Sucker. And if you can picture those as first-party data points, where everyone says, let's do a first-party data strategy, but his wife's filming him because at the back the zip's open, all the leaves are flying out again. And that's what I think a lot of people are doing with their first-party data strategy at the moment. If you can't prove the informed consent, and if you weren't clear about how it's going to be used, and if you were ambiguous, you might not be able to use that data. So consent is an important thing. I know AppsFly, who are sponsoring, they have a built-in solution which is like a data clean room that helps you to kind of do collaboration in a compliant way. Who else is sponsoring that I saw? They've probably got something. AWS, they've got AWS for, they've got data cleaners for AWS. There's all sorts of tools, but I think the most important thing of all will be understanding the consent. Because even data clean room, data collaboration, sharing of data, if you share something, even a data clean room, it may not be allowed based on what we're seeing here. There was a term bandied about the other day as data clean rooms are akin to money laundering, which I think was a little bit out there, but there was a bit of a point there. If we're going out and we're creating cohorts to target, and we are in a way individuating someone from a crowd, and we don't have the permission to do that, where we've been very clear about it, then probably fall on our heads for doing it. So I hope I gave enough of an idea of what to do without getting too dramatic.
Yeah, well, I mean, the consent piece is really important. It's like the first gateway to building trust explicitly. David, trust, on the topic of trust, paramount in banking and finance. How can businesses efficiently walk that personalization and privacy tightrope? And also, how do you see data anonymization or minimization contributing to personalized experiences while protecting consumers' privacy?
Yeah, I think that just to follow on from the previous point, just while we've got it, I think we should be preparing for a paradigm that is the opposite of what we've got today. And I think tokenization of information is going to play a key part of that, because the challenges we've seen that have crystallised over the last 12, 18 months with respect to data breaches have come from not so much the use but the storage, and how particularly PII data is stored and for how long it is stored. So I think that eventually we've got to get to this paradigm where, and it follows the principles of the consumer data right, the consumer owns their information. It might be held at a central repository, say the passport office or the motor vehicle registry or whatever, but that's where it stays. So the consumer actually issues a token for the third party to access that, but they don't get to store it, such that if they do get breached, it doesn't get.
I absolutely agree.
That's where we've got to get to.
If anyone here has a spreadsheet on their phone from work that someone emailed them to do something with, if you lose your phone, you're screwed. If someone kind of hacks into your phone, so all that total is so important. Yeah.
The frustration is we have the technology to support that paradigm today. We just need to move our public sector to that particular point. So that's my first point. But with respect to how we do it in the financial services industry today, how we balance privacy with getting good, unique segment of one propositions to customers, we've been doing that for a long time. I wouldn't say that that's anything new or radically different to what we've been doing in financial services forever. And in case you all know this, we have the ability to collect data, depersonalize it, aggregate it, and build models, predictive models from it. It's just the nature of what we do. That's not where the problem lies. The problem lies, to my point before, the way that we store it and it becomes available to malicious actors. That's more the issue, as I see it.
So I think that's a big one for the actual vendors and platforms operating today. You know, how, if they have a solution around, like you said, tokenizing. So you feel that that's the direction that we'll go in, where you want to be dealing with a vendor or a platform that doesn't actually house or store the data.
Absolutely. I think it's end point. The only question is how long is it going to take us to get to that end point?
It's like when I was looking at the MoEngage demo earlier on, it's the first time I've seen the platform, I'll be honest, sorry. But I just look at the fact that there's a big bunch of lost, and they've not been involved, they've not been engaged for ages. If you don't need to keep it, why risk it? Given, do you know when the last update was to the Privacy Act? Just as a hands up if you know when the last, and I'll quiz you. When was the last update to the Privacy Act?
88.
Anyone? No?
2003.
Almost. It was actually an amendment made in December last year, and you would have seen it in regards to the penalty increase. And that is why this is also a big focus at the moment, because boards are now held in a very accountable manner, where you've got a $50 million fine, or you've got 3 times the benefit that you gained using that data by keeping it in that lost bucket or somehow, or doing it nefariously. Or if you can't work out from those two, it would be 3 times the, 30% of the annualized turnover during the period of that breach. So that's a company killer. And when you look at that bucket of information, as you were just saying about storage of information, why keep it if you don't need it? And that's why everyone's data from Optus, Medibank is all over the place. And the next challenge is, if it's not tokenized, then the data that someone has bought on the dark web from Optus can then be used to then re-identify other sets of data that are out there, and research data sets and everything else as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Raj, what are some of the do's and don'ts you recommend to a consumer brand?
Do's, definitely I recommend three things. I think one of the panelists before said about omni-channel. There was a discussion of omni-channel. So definitely, banks right now, in Australia especially, they're, of course, are very regulatory-driven vertical, but they do need to explore different channels, secure channels, for the transaction. For example, in Singapore, there's a WhatsApp Pay. WhatsApp is a heavily, secure channel as well, compared to SMS, which can be easily hacked. So something bank can explore about different channels. There's something Casey mentioned about the verification. About the data validation. So, all the financial institutions have KYC practices, but how about you implement Know Your Bank as well? So something one of the bank in India started. They actually do 16-digit grid on the back of the credit card, and every time when bank calls them or they call the bank representative need to read out the random numbers from the grid. So Know Your Bank, it is something they should try as well. And on top of the data validation. So now you getting all the data, but on top of that, how refresh all these data. So they, bank need to implement technologies like SIM swap. So, on the basis of someone calls you, like the customer calls you, existing customer, but also they should have the fraud score pop up as well automatically from the back end, working with telco, and their fraud score will get updated if the SIM swap happen, because in Australia a lot of frauds are happening with the SIM swap. To find out the SIM swaps happening or not. Validation as well, they need to find new ways beyond OTP. So we are working with a bank right now in Australia that's called a silent authentication. So when you, instead of receiving an SMS, your phone, modern phones, they open with biometrics. So automatically, every morning when you open your phone, you authenticated yourself to the phone at the SIM card level to the telco. Now, when you want to open you want to install a new app or anything, instead of instead of OTP, you authenticate it with your biometrics at the SIM card level. So these are some of the do's banks should do. Banks should not do, or they need to reduce doing that, especially in Australia about the SMS. They need to stop sending SMSs out, notifications out without consent. There's something going back to the topic about taking consent from the bank and what is your preferred channel, and only communicate on that channel. Don't communicate. Someone mentioned about how many push notifications is ideal. So banks should ask for all those things as well. That, by the way, which channel and how do you want us to notify and how many times. So these are the do's and don'ts BFSI should implement.
Thanks, Raj. We're pretty much coming to the end, so I'm going to ask for some closing statements and takeaways for the audience. We could sit here for a much longer time, as I'm sure the panelists would agree, but it is getting to that time where we'd like to connect you all outside and have a drink. But in closing, just can you share some of the brands in Australia? Raj, you've already named a couple of examples of who's doing it quite well, who's balancing personalization and privacy without naming the brands. But can you guys think of any other examples from a marketing standpoint? Some that are really taking the right approach that others can learn from.
I'd love to say that I've found some standout financial services customers that we work with who are doing personalisation really well. Sadly, there's some really good stuff happening at the endpoints, the polar endpoints of a life cycle. Particularly in banking, the only 2 points that really matter in getting it right from a personalisation perspective is when you come on, making sure that the product and process is good, and when you either are looking to leave or trying to leave. We work with some organisations who are doing a massive job at doing. They're doing a lot of work in the banking space with mortgage customers, helping mortgage providers retain customers because it's such a competitive market at the moment. We work with a great company called Alula who've been building a retention product based on that. They're working with about 20 banks around Australia. But one thing that I did find, it's not in financial services, actually in ticket sales. We have a customer, Ticketek, who've done a massive amount of work with their personalisation of their newsletter. I get a newsletter from the other one who I buy through, and every time I get it, and I got one today, it's full of stuff that I could care less about. Things that I'll never go to. Ticketek, using our platform, our personalised products, rebuilt their newsletter, making it highly personal to buying choices and buying patterns. And the stat that they've got out of the back of that piece of work, they've increased their buyer rate through the newsletter by 250%. I mean, that just demonstrates the power of getting it right through a regular newsletter that is actually tailored to the demonstrated buying patterns of that customer. So that's the sort of the bar that I look at in terms of what good personalisation looks like. Yeah.
Did you have a response?
Oh, look, I'm in a terribly sticky situation where I can't really talk about the success stories because I fix problems. You don't want to talk about where people have been leaking data and everything else and where there's issues. But I think where I've seen people who are grasping this head on, it's those that have taken a solid look at the customer experience layer where you're interacting with that customer and making sure what you're actually telling them in your terms and conditions, in your data disclosure policy, in your privacy policy, matches what you're actually doing. And when I say look at your customer experience layer, I'm talking about all those tags I used to use to put Australians in debt with credit cards. There's this whole spaghetti of messy tags, zombie tags we're calling them, that are just sitting there waiting to be exploited, that that people have just buried their heads in the sand on. And we often find in our audits where people are just sending information in the clear, email addresses, dates of birth, out to Google Analytics, get stored in Google Analytics, out to other vendors. People have got 17 tag manager systems without knowing who runs those tag manager systems. And these are very big corporations. So I think people who are on top of what data is being collected about your customer, and remembering that there is a new term, a new line item in the Privacy Act that is saying an inexhaustible and always updatable list of technical terms that will be considered personal information. So that will be anything that will be able to individuate someone out of a crowd. So that will be a hashed email, even though it's anonymized, will be considered personal information. So if you are pressing a button in your TikTok, is this being recorded? TikTok Match Boost, whatever it's called, that button there, we have seen that will automatically change the script on a page and scrape a hashed ID before someone's clicked submit, and it will send it out. And that's not anonymous, that's personal information. So know what's leaving your website, what you're collecting, and then make sure your terms and conditions match that.
Yeah, really good point. Hashed emails or PII masking, whatever people call it, isn't enough. It's not really going to solve the problem of privacy or keep you compliant. On that note, thank you very much to our speakers, David, Chris, and Raj. It's been a pleasure to discuss this pretty important topic.
We'll
so
wrap
thank you
it
very
next
much.
time.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, guys.
Bye, thank you.
All right. Well, this pretty much wraps up the afternoon. Thanks again for sitting through. I'm glad we still have some daylight. We did go a little bit over, and we did start a little bit late, so I really appreciate your patience as we got through that. Just to end, kind of bookend the conversation when we introed, one of the things since MoEngage's launch, since we launched here in June, July last year, we've seen a huge challenge in the market around keeping up with the changing dynamics around customer lifecycle marketing, personalization we would have heard about today, A/B testing. And there's a lot of challenges in organizations around the different various skill sets who are managing these types of strategies in organizations. So part of Hash Growth, as you would have seen earlier on, is building that community around knowledge and education. We're launching in this market in the new year the Customer Engagement Strategy Workshop, which is part of the Customer Engagement Leadership Program, which is a cohort-based learning program that is built on the foundations and principles of customer lifecycle marketing. This is an tech-agnostic principles learning program that anyone can go through. So if you are interested, we are getting people built for the cohorts, but it is something that we have noticed is a huge gap within organisations who have probably worked on one type of channel or the other, but bringing it all together in a cohesive strategy is something that we are very adamant around building the community around in Australia. So if this is of interest, please do come up and chat to us. These are some of the topics that we'll cover, and then this will be built out in a broader learning program mid next year. So please, feel free to come up and discuss. But again, thank you to all our speakers, our panelists, Dana, Jen, thanks for moderating, and we'll see you guys outside.